economic context. First and foremost, what are our broad economic goals? To simplify it for everybody, the broad economic goals are that we expect as people demographically to enjoy a better standard of living than our parents, and that our children should have a better standard of living than ours. When you have a situation where the generations come in and the generations before you enjoy the higher standard of living and well-being, and you then something is wrong with the output coefficient. And so doing, therefore, we see that over the past decades, our economic growth rate has actually declined, and our income per capita of people are declining. And so the root cause, one of the root causes of this is corrupt structures, corrupt implementation, and low corrupting performance. Now, that is just to say that the economy is not performing well, not only because of corruption, because of there's mismanagement and all other things. The problems of Nigeria are well documented. Now, what is the cost of corruption? The cost of corruption is this. We, at this time last year, or 2 years ago, last year in particular, at the peak of the COVID, the price of oil came down to $28, when talked about 32. The average price of oil last year was, in all, towards the end it improved, was about almost $45 to $50 a barrel. The average price of oil this year is about $65. Today is $76 a barrel. Our production last year was low at 1.51. Our production this year is slightly higher. However, currency was trading at 430, 440 last year at the peak in the parallel market. And this year it's the other way around. So the higher the oil price, the higher the production, the weakness, the greater the external weaknesses, which is incorrect. That is because we have in economics what we call injections and leakages. Injections have a positive multiplier. That is, if I invest 100 million naira, the multiplier of, which is called K, would make it up to 110 million naira, depending on what the multiplier is. But if there are leakages, you have what they call a negative multiplier. So how do you know that an economy is suboptimal in its performance? Look at two factors. One, the growth rate compared to the growth rate of population, which everybody knows. But more importantly is the labor productivity and the total factor productivity ratios. In all of this, Nigeria is showing negative performance, which means our capital stock is not only suboptimally being utilized, the capital stock, most of it is stranded capital, which is not doing anything. And if anything, this generation is paying the interest on the loans on the capital stock that was taken for stranded capital. So what in real economic terms does this mean? For today, total factor productivity in Japan is about 5–6%. Total factor productivity in South Africa and Ghana is much higher. Our total factor productivity is -5, in spite of the fact that the capital stock is much higher. Now, labor productivity in Nigeria is negative. Labor productivity growth is -2, which means that if you take all Nigerians out of Nigeria, the economy will grow on its own without labor positively. And let me prove this. Last year, the lockdown was announced March 31st. On March 31st, 10 days clearing was stopped. And then the banks, the banks were working virtually and partially. The government level 1 to 14 or level 1 to 15 were to work from home. Guess what? The revenue of government, the performance of government in the second quarter of 2020 was infinitely better than its performance in the first quarter, and definitely much better than the performance in the fourth quarter when the workers came back. What does that tell you? The transaction flow in Nigeria increased in spite of all this by about almost 18%. in the second quarter and almost 25% in the third quarter. These were lockdown periods, and they reopened the airports around July 31st, August. That is domestic flights for Abuja and Lagos alone. What it does mean is that the federal government and state governments of Nigeria were able to perform better because their workers were at home, not obstructing, not extorting, and not doing anything, right? That tells you the extent of structural corruption. It tells you that, and when they all came back and we started reopening and bringing them back to the offices, we began to see a drop-off in the indicators. In other words, the revenue maintained its trajectory, but the debt service was not affected, but overheads, government overheads and expenses shot through the roof. So you have overheads and expenses, debt service and salaries constitute almost 140% of independent revenue. And if you break down the expenses, you find ESTA code for traveling within Nigeria. There was even ESTA code for when the airports were closed for one institution traveling abroad when there was nowhere nothing to fly in. So now that is one indicator, cost of running government. Now let us look at petrol consumption. Petrol consumption growth in Nigeria is running at 15 times higher than the GDP growth rate. Average GDP growth rate in the last 5 years was about 3% in the last 5 years. In fact, lower than that. But the growth in petrol consumption has gone from 35 million liters during the Occupy Ojota to now we are told it's 103 million liters. How is it possible that this could happen? The Nigerian GDP is about 60% of the whole of West Africa. So if Nigeria's normal consumption is about 40 million liters, and it constitutes 60% of the West African economy, the total West African consumption of petrol can only be, if 40 million liters is 60% of X, what is X? So let us assume for sake of argument to make it easy that the total consumption of West Africa of petrol is about 60 million liters. So if Nigeria alone, if we smuggle everything and we ship everything across to the West African countries, together with Nigeria will not consume more than 60 million liters. So where is the 103 million liters coming from? Where did the other 43 million liters come from? Because it has become a criminal enterprise. People will import the petrol, take it back and import it again, take it back and import it again. So much so that the amount, the dysfunctional demand or dysfunctional supply is already up to 40 or 50% of the total supply in the country. And that's a major issue. Our subsidy now is about 2.2 trillion, which is about almost, God knows, about almost 15, 20% of the total budget of this country. I'm using this as indices to tell you what the cost of corruption, the opportunity cost of corruption, more than anything else, the fact that it reduces the growth and the well-being of this generation and the future generations. And because of the hopelessness and the deterioration in the quality of life of generations and subsequent generations, you now have a situation where 50% of Nigerians think that to emigrate is their best achievement. Many of them, asylum seekers applications have increased by 1,389%. But that is not to say that there are not some steps being taken. Steps are being taken. But until you take a total look at it as comprehensively, you will not be able to achieve this. So what do we see? We see pushback from vested interests. Massive pushback. And the vested interest people are smart. Their strategy is very clear, very clear. They do not intend to stop reform. They intend to delay reform. And when you delay reform, the amount of adjustment required becomes higher and becomes almost untenable. Therefore, if you were to alter the electricity tariff 2-3 years ago, what you would have paid would have been much lower than if you had altered it today. But by delaying it, you make it almost impossible for even the unions or anybody if you altered the petrol pricing formula, right?
I'd give you just 1 more minute to round up so we can go to the next panelist.
If you alter the petrol pricing formula, you would have been able to do it at 180, whatever it is, and the mechanism thereafter. Today, if you have to do it, you need 250. If you have to alter the exchange rate, the same thing. So what I'm saying is that corruption, the delayed reform entrenches structural corruption. And the total impact is a sense of hopelessness and making the people actually less enthusiastic about their own country. Thank you very much.